its US foreign relations. So US has always been philosophizing about capitalism, right? Being capitalistic. Being capitalistic is all about being profit inclined. So going about the financial aspect of profit, what do you need for profit? You need sales. So for sales, there are only two things required. You need to capture more markets and you need to have resources as cheap as possible. So now we go to the resource part. So one of the major resources is oil, and one of the major chunk of countries which have oil is Middle East. So we establish the relationship for USA with Middle East in phase manner. So in the first phase, we go to the phase of 47 to 53, wherein we see the rise of Israel. Israel being a nation which had a fight with Palestine and got a nation for itself. US saw a major superpower in the Middle East in the form of Israel. So they established ties with Israel, and one more thing, they wanted to establish grounds in Middle East. Major motive of establishing grounds in the Middle East is what we will explain in the future instance. What they said is why they are going towards Middle East is they said that they want to curb communism in the form of the Russian influence. The Russia is having more influence on the Middle East, so they said we want to curb communism, that's why we are entering Middle East. What their underlying motive was to have an establishment in Middle East so that they can have more and more oil for their mass consumerism that they wanted to profess. In the second phase, we go from 50s to 60s. In this phase, we saw a major nationalism uprising, wherein the Arab countries had their nations, their common people uprising or revolting against the autocrats. So what US did is they aided these autocrats to curb this nationalism. So what we saw it as they were aiding autocrats and they were stabilizing the government. What they were majorly intending to do is protecting their Western interest. Protecting their interest. So we now go to the next stage, which is 60s to 70s, in which we saw the rise of when Britishers said that the revenue model to control the Middle East is not that promising, that profitable for them. So they told the US that you control the Middle East for yourself. So the Middle East, the US kind of provided independence for Kuwait and Qatar, stating that they should have basically US or Western oriented policies. Again, we see it as they profess that they kind of provided independence to two nations, and they took them forward. What their underlying motive was, again, to profess to have Western policies in Middle Eastern nations. Again, in the same phase, we saw the formation of Aramco. Aramco being Arabian American company, which was the company between the Saudi Arabs. This was formed in Saudi. So this was a company of America and the Arabians. Again, they wanted to establish stronghold of oil in their reservoir so that they can again profess mass consumerism. So after we have seen this till the 70s, we go to the next phase of which US saw a major, which US felt prey of the events of Middle East. So what we saw here is the Iran independence. Iran got independence, and this Shah, which was controlled by the US, or which was a puppet to US, he was taken over by the Khomeini, and which we saw in the movie Argo. And again, we also saw the OPEC being formalized, and this Aramco, which US formed, got nationalized. So the entire ideology of US utilizing the resources in Saudi fell apart, and they were falling prey of the events in the Middle East. So this called for an extreme measure, which they took in the second phase, or in the fifth phase, I should say, that is post 2000, which they faced again a major event of 9/11, which saw the fall of World Trade Centers, and in a pursuit of Osama bin Laden, they attacked Afghanistan. So after attacking Afghanistan, they said they wanted to pursue Osama bin Laden. They were fighting a war against terror. Again, the underlying motive was to have a strategic location. And after that, they also invaded Iraq. Again, with the say that they were making the Saddam Hussein fall, and the entire philosophy was just to get strategic location. And another, in Afghanistan, there was a pipeline from Afghanistan to Turkmenistan. So they wanted to secure this pipeline. So, however, or whatever US has said about its foreign policies, or whatever US has said that they are secular and they are democratic, they always had an economic interest in their entire foreign relationships. So the entire diplomacy and military that they used was entirely for its strategic and economic interest that the US had. Now Vikram would take over to explain the consumerism aspect of these foreign policies.
Hi. Now I would like to explain more about the So now I would like to explain more about mass consumerism, how US actually started with it and how they actually played out. So actually American consumerism started in early 20th century. So initially how they promoted consumerism is like they actually promoted it like they are gonna give quality products which are affordable for all segments, and initially one of the products, for example, is sewing machines, which these singer companies they exported to like most of the countries, and how they promoted that is like they promoted it as a product using which they can help the woman, like woman empowerment. And another thing is, Americans, they are like so in the other markets there are two kind of in the other markets there are two sectors of people. One sector is who supported the westernization, and others who didn't support the westernization. The sector who supported the westernization is those who early adopted these American products. The sector who didn't support the westernization is like who are more interested in promoting the local culture, and who are like more interested in preserving the local products and the work of the artisans. So what was their main propaganda was that we should be like more nationalistic, and we should like more use the local products, and how they portray the people who are the first movers and who like use the western products initially was like they portrayed them as evil. So actually, as I already mentioned, mass consumerism was pursued as destroying the local cultures and differences, and it actually standardized products across cultures. So again, like the early adopters of Americanism as portrayed as evil. So another thing about this westernization is these Hollywood movies and the other certain factors, they were a big appeal for the youth. So these Hollywood movies are also a point of promotion where like the kind of cultures which these Hollywood movies portray, the youth segment actually tried to adopt that, and this actually like made the sale of the American products more. This actually encouraged the sale of more American products. Another thing is Americanization was echoed as a cultural aspiration. And another thing they have mentioned is the word local. They have used it to explain the fact that this US mass consumerization actually simultaneously brought about the global uniformities and the local differences. The global uniformities is because of the fact that the US was able to produce mass products and sell the exact same product across different markets, and the local differences were destroyed because of the fact that the local artisans, they kind of lost their market. One of the specific incident where the China tried to take up the challenge of the westernization is, they, instead of prohibiting the entry of the western goods, they allowed it, and they actually supported the local players to take a stand against that. And then we had the consumer movements where the consumers tried to be nationalistic, but after the Cold War, at the end of the Cold War, it eventually faltered. So how the 20th century, the growth of America started is they banked completely on exports. In the first 3 quarters of the century, they were like mostly prominently focusing on the exports. In the final quarter, the American economy, like they became more of a consuming economy. And one thing what happened is, initially they had a lot of resources which they used to like create products and send to other countries, but after a particular point, the products started depleting, and so what the America started is, they actually started scouting for resources in the other countries. So this is some basic thing about the US mass consumerism. Now, Vignesh.
Going back to the title here, so the metaphor that we had to talk about was foreign relations, and the text that we had was in US foreign relations and how US foreign relations was shaped by its consumerism. So US foreign relations are a direct result of the globalization of mass consumerism that has taken hold of that country. Now Mohit set the tone by talking about how US foreign relations go ahead in the scout of resources, the way they manipulate people, their double standards, the way they sell democracy and free market while propping up autocratic puppet regimes in the Middle East to get their resources. And then Vikram spoke about consumerism, how consumerism came about, how it was touted as a liberating concept in the beginning of the 20th century, something that set people apart but set people together, like how the ubiquitousness of a small shaving razor, a thing as small as shaving razor, it ensured that even an aristocrat and a common peasant, both of them could have a clean shave, something that was not possible in the early centuries. So American consumerism was touted to the world as something that sets people free, that gives people the ability to produce and consume and get out of the feudal rut. But then the dialectical historical materialism that we want to see here is that the foreign relations of the United States are a direct result of the proliferation of consumerism. The way the country wants to promote the consumerism, the way they want to capture markets, and the way they want to corner resources to produce their goods, cheaply. This all started in the 20th century, where there was a mad race for resources, where they tried to corner oil, where they wanted to produce goods cheaply. And as the economy progressed, and they slowly started outsourcing the production to other parts of the world. For instance, now China is called the factory place of the world. Not for nothing, but the reason is primarily because American companies outsource most of the production from China. Now what happens to China is that America tried to enforce its imperialism. So this is not more of formal imperialism where there's a monarch and he rules over the people, but also in terms of cultural imperialism, where American genes, American rock music were touted as symbols of freedom. During Cold War in Soviet Russia and other Eastern European bloc countries, where people tried to get out of the oppressive regimes, American consumerism in the form of rock music and genes were touted as symbols of freedom. And the capitalists did not stop here. They said, buy our jeans, buy our cars, buy our music, and hence every single thing, every single symbol was sold. So and they propagated this by foreign relations. They said they used music as a tool, they used culture as a tool to topple governments, to promote the idea of free market everywhere so that they can go and sell their goods. Now coming back and showing the whole picture together, what happens in America now is that America no longer produces most of its goods but imports them. So it imports them from various parts of the world. And what happens when a single country turns producer is that this country tries to form a cartel with fellow producers, as it happens in OPEC, or it tries to establish its own power, as it's happening with China. So China now produces a lot of goods. It has a trade surplus in the US, and now it wants to stamp its own imperialism. It wants to stamp its own mark and remove US hegemony. Now what US foreign relations here do is that they don't want this to happen, because then the whole American model would fall away. So to counter Russia, what they did was that they propped up autocratic regimes in the Middle East. So Russia went about supporting Shias. Iran, they went about supporting Nasser in the Middle East. So they propped up Israel, they propped up the Sunni extremists. So they kept propping up one after another to control them. And today, to control China, the United States is now trying to prop up India. If you see, the US people were dead against selling us nuclear fuel. In 1998, when Buddha smiled, when India went on and exploded nuclear weapons in Pokhran, US imposed sanctions, severe sanctions. But then this very same US 10 years later, with George W. Bush came down to India and said, okay, take this Indo-US civilian nuclear deal. That is simply because US does not want China to expand, and it is using this simple tool of foreign relations to ensure that its hegemony stays, that its brand of consumerism, its companies, the Pepsis and the Cokes and the Walmarts of the world state, and then they propagate the US way of life. So that's how they prop up with foreign relations. And the funny part of the whole thing is that the way the whole thing is packaged. So they say we are living freely. So your way of life is wrong. So they go and say that your conservative way of life is wrong, our free market way of life is right. When the so-called conservative countries in the world, small tiny countries with conservative rules, you can take Bhutan, which is got a very primitive society, it's called one of the happiest nations in the world. Whereas US is sad, half its people are poor. A lot of these poor people, are into drugs. They export weapons. So it's a lot of problems that happen, but they try to cloak it in this ideal of democracy and free market. So to put this all together, to get an Indian perspective to this, and a contemporary economic example of this would be the Union Carbide example. So Union Carbide is an American company. Now Union Carbide set up this plant in India, and it said, okay, we are going to give jobs to people. And they said, okay, we are going to produce pesticides with which you can kill pests and grow crops. What they actually wanted to do was that they wanted to produce chemicals cheap and export them, find a market in Southeast Asia and make a lot of money. And why they wanted to make a lot of money? They didn't want to, obey foreign regulations. I mean, the regulators who said, okay, you have to have these safety restrictions. So they followed nothing, and as a result, what happened was worst industrial disaster in 1984. So when then again the US used its foreign tools. They said Warren Anderson, who was Union Carbide's chief, he just came down to India, was promptly arrested. By then the US used its foreign tool, bought out the Indian politicians, used its foreign tools and said, okay fine, we'll allow US to invest in in the US. We'll give them shops here and there. They threw some money to the Congress. And what happened? Warren Anderson left India and he's missing ever since. So this simple example shows that US and its corporations want only profit at the expense of anything, at anybody's expense, and they use foreign relations as a tool, as a cloak to sell this own concept. Thank you.
Thank you very